What's up, everybody? Jordan Stewart here from Vover. Thanks so much for tapping into the Vover original show. Just a reminder that if you want to drop your opinions about the episode or respond to the host and guests with your voice, go and download the Vover app wherever you get your apps. Vover, voice over everything. Enjoyed the show.
It's time to level up with Dr. Mondo. What is good, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Level Up with Dr. Mondo. I'm a licensed therapist, CEO and founder of Cheat Code Foundation, a foundation where we're dedicated to ending stigma around speaking out about your mental health struggles and improving opportunities and ways to get access to transformative mental health experiences in every community, including underserved, non-served communities. So on this podcast, we talk about the fact that in order to level up in life, often you have to encounter some internal challenges. You have to face yourself. You have to be willing to prioritize your mentals. If you want to take that next step in your career, your personal life, your relationships, all the roles that you play in life. In order to step up and get to that next level, you will have to prioritize your mentals. And this is a show where typically we interview people every single week who have gone through those challenges as they've ascended to success in the various careers and fields that they operate in. We talk to athletes, we talk to entrepreneurs. And a lot of what it's getting at here, the more you hear those stories, it's inspiring you, yes, but it's ending stigma. Because when we can take someone extremely successful and have them say out loud, I used to struggle. And this is something that I went through that you never heard. That makes a difference. It makes a difference in how likely we are in our journeys of ascension to also share our struggles out loud. You'll even hear some people call shots about how they wish they could have had a redo. They wish they would have reached out to a therapist. They wish that they would have went and talked to someone or even told friends and family, owned their struggles out loud, because something about the isolation actually made it harder. We can learn from that. So ultimately, what the goal of this podcast is to end stigma. And that's something that we talk about so often. End the stigma. It's okay to not be okay. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't have started a foundation with that being one of the key pillars and goals if I didn't believe wholeheartedly in that. I'm fired up by that. I'm fired up to watch more people talk about their struggles out loud. The stigma is being not only chipped away at, we're taking a sledgehammer to it, especially with professional athletes now being willing to do the same and speak out loud. It's no longer just Kevin Love, but it's the majority of athletes throughout sports now beginning to acknowledge it out loud to varying degrees. Some just saying it matters, others telling their stories. But I wanted to take this podcast and just dedicate it to what's next. Because I think that it's really easy for us sometimes to focus on goals without really considering what happens after we accomplish the goal. There's a thing that happens, and if anyone's ever accomplished a big goal, which I know most of us have in some varying degrees, we're very well aware of this. It also exists for taking big trips, big goals, big trips. There's a post-trip, there's a post-accomplishment depression. Anyone ever felt that? You accomplished something big, and it was the thing that you were looking forward to. It was the thing you were anticipating. It was the reason you got up. It was the reason you put the work in. And then the minute you achieve it, the clock starts ticking on this little nagging internal low of just feeling like, now what? What do we do now? It's important to consider before we've ended that goal what we might want to make the goal next. It's important in some cases if we're living for the quarterly vacations. I know quarterly, who takes quarterly? That's my goal. I don't really do it, but that's my goal, quarterly vacations. It's important to plan the next vacation. Human beings need things to look forward to. We need bookends. We need things to anchor to. In the fight around mental health, we set our goal so high by saying, let's end stigma. I remember starting 2020 and getting on television news stations and having them ask me, mental health, what's the forecast for the next decade? Who knew COVID was coming? Who knew how that would accelerate the conversation around mental health? It made it something we could no longer ignore. I remember saying at that time, this bold prediction at the end of 2030, the stigma will have toppled. I remember at the time people saying, wow, you really think so? Like, truly, like I said, you'll know it because in 2030, we'll start saying, who's your doctor? Who's your dentist? Who's your therapist? Who's your life coach? Just in that sort of nonchalant way. And people were saying at the time, man, you're tripping. There's no way that's going to happen in 10 years. Now we're at a point, not even 2 years later, where that seems like a foregone conclusion, does it not? By 2030? The goal that we had for 2030 is more likely to be accomplished by 2022, which means that what do we do with the next 8 years? What do we do with the future? I'll tell you from an inside vantage point in this field, I don't think it's about simply setting a goal because it's a good practice to beat off the post-accomplishment blues. Instead, I think we need to get serious about focusing on the next mountain to climb, because we're not realizing that by accomplishing the first goal, ending stigma, we are inadvertently creating a bigger mountain to climb, a mountain that most of us aren't even aware of. And that mountain is access. Our field is in disarray. When I say our field, I mean the mental health field. It's in disarray. It's been in disarray. You just haven't noticed it because most people haven't really made it a priority in their lives to address their mental health. Occasionally, you might go to a therapist if your marriage is in trouble or if you're really having a hard time just moving through life. But the majority of people by nature have not been prioritizing their mental health. And yet now, with stigma going down, we have a lot of new people who are entering in to the conversation, which means they're entering into the marketplace. And I hate to use, business language in this, but it's a reality. Supply, demand. The demand for mental health therapists, the demand for clinicians, the demand for people to support you and I in our mental health journeys is increasing. And yet the demand is increasing, but the supply of warm bodies to fill the role, forget adequate, forget highly trained, highly skilled, forget highly relatable, highly effective. The supply of just warm bodies to fill the seats can't keep up with the current demand and the rise in demand that we're seeing across our country and across the globe. It's a scary thought. And that's just one half of it. The other half of it that we look at, and the part that really motivated me to start the foundation, Cheat Code Foundation, is access is an issue And it will be an issue not only for all of us that need mental health support moving forward because of the increased demand and the low supply of mental health professionals to help. But in addition, there are still other barriers to entry that impact equality in accessing services. Those barriers are cost. Those barriers are fit. It's not like everyone's car all of a sudden needs a mechanic and we don't have enough mechanics. There's more to this. It's not like there's a need and a surge for doctors and there's simply not enough doctors to go around. There are variables to who you open up your deepest, your darkest portions of your soul to that come into play in selecting who you want to work with as your mental health professional. Human nature is we open up to people that we feel like understand us, have empathy and compassion for us, get us, don't judge us. And we often feel more of those sort of attributes exist in folks that have lived a similar life experience to us. When you look at underserved, non-served communities, poor communities, the opportunity for people in poor communities, despite the fact that they face higher levels of stress than affluent communities or middle-class communities, despite the higher stress, there's even less of an opportunity in poor, underserved, non-served communities to find access to mental health professionals. Yes, it has something to do with the overall landscape in lack of supply, but that supply becomes even harder to meet in underserved and non-served communities, especially when it comes to the barrier of entry of cost. The average therapy session costs $150 a session. As someone that's sat and done the work of a therapist, I will not argue for a pay decrease. You may catch me arguing for a pay increase. It's hard work supporting someone emotionally, to put everything in your own life aside and just be there for someone. And to do it for 20 or 25 or 30 people in a given week is a lot. And that's just private practice. There are some clinicians right now that have caseloads of hundreds. I'm not going to argue that it's therapists that should have to be taking the breaks in how much they're getting paid to do their job. But what I am going to argue is that as a nation that can fund wars, a nation that can fund anything that we have the whim and the lobbyists in the corner of and behind, I believe there's funding that exists out there, if we wanted to use it, that could go to solving the issue of access in the mental health crisis. I also believe realistically that the public system is not going to meet that demand or that concern. It's going to have to be us getting creative, finding ways to privately fund the need and necessity that many have in underserved and non-served communities to getting access to services, to finding and creating more opportunities for people in those non-served communities to become fast-tracked as helpers, clinicians, life coaches, so that we can meet the increase in need and demand. But this is what's on our horizon. And I take this opportunity to tell you that ending stigma is so important. And I thought it would take a decade to do it. But it's actually looking more and more like we'll get there a lot faster than a decade. But I don't want us to take our eyes off the prize. Ending stigma around mental health struggles and talking about and seeking support is not enough. We now need to tackle the issue of access. how do we help more and more people that were born with gifts of empathy, compassion, grace, and mercy? People that are born to do the work that I'm doing, that other mental health therapists, clinicians, coaches are doing. How do we get more of those people in the marketplace? How do we get them in their own practices? How do we get them serving the communities that they live in, the communities that they grow up in? How do we take the astounding number of 5% of clinicians being Black and increase that to meet a demand in Black and brown communities? How do we find a way to creatively fund therapy, and not just any therapy, but good, transformative, trauma-informed therapy? How do we find ways creatively to fund that in the communities that need it the most? How do we find a way to replace insurance status with need for who gets the care that they ultimately deserve? Not because of any other reason, the fact it's the right thing to do. I think it's important to, at this moment in time, pause and say, this goal we're accomplishing is great. Ending stigma is so important. We must focus on the next goal, access. I'll tell you, I've thought a lot about this. I've spent a lot of time this past year and a half with the foundation we've created in trying to create solutions and solves for this. Not just simply tell people that access is an issue, but I'm trying, along with others, many others, we're trying to figure out ways to create solves to this problem of access. There's some exciting stuff happening, but we're going to need more people. The people that are going to be, I believe, the most valuable in this fight to correct the market, to increase supply so that we can meet demand. Those are going to be people from other industries. It's going to be people not within mental health, but it's going to be people within the business world. It's going to be people within the tech world, people who've had success solving issues like this in other walks of life, coming into the mental health crisis and helping us find solutions. It's going to take politicians, lobbyists, innovators, entrepreneurs. And I'll tell you, there are people entering that marketplace now. We've seen a gigantic increase in valuations of companies like Calm, Talkspace, Headspace. We've seen many people enter the marketplace with technology proposals to help in the mental health marketplace. But I'll tell you, in most cases, they are still not getting at this bigger issue of solving on access. They may be helping us find a therapist with new algorithms and technology. But if the same number of therapists exists in that pool and they're all overworked and they're all overburdened, and most of them aren't culturally competent or they're unaffordable, then how much of a solve is that really? Or is that just capitalizing on a buzzword or a buzz term like mental health and raising funds for another opportunity to make a buck off of a need, but not providing an actual solution? I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just know that there's things we need to do. So let me leave you with what I believe is not the end all be all solution, but a little bit of hope and optimism to anchor to as we move forward. I'll tell you about what we're doing in the foundation. So I believe that the way we're going to enter some form of solutions around access is by training and equipping leaders in underserved, non-served communities, especially BIPOC leaders, Black, Indigenous, people of color, to do the work as coaches, to fast track them, to pay for their education, to get trained in the best services that exist. So we have an academy within our foundation where we train coaches in non-served communities. We're doing it here in Sacramento. We plan on doing it soon in LA, Pittsburgh, and Atlanta, where we will be training, like we are here in Sacramento, 15 clinicians that are BIPOC in underserved communities and training them in the same methods that I've used with the athletes I've worked with, like Dansby Swanson, Lindsey Vonn, Mookie Betts, Chris Godwin. The goal here is that if we can train these clinicians and we can pay for their training, we could help them enter into the marketplace and create jobs for them to go out and do the work. Now, we still haven't solved how do we allow people who need the services to get access to it. So the same way we pay for their training is how we pay for the work to be done. We raise money privately through the foundation to pay for people who need it in the communities, who have high levels of trauma, low levels of income, to get the help they need, regardless of insurance status, employment status, just simply based on need. And so now part of our solve and part of what I think is going to be some of the solution is essentially us creating our own internal insurance system, community by community, that says we are here to privately fund the needs of people, to privately fund and fast track people in the community that are the OGs, people that are in the community that are the helpers. They may not have the credentials, but let's get them the credentials to help. Let's create a general fund that we privately donate to. If we can raise, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars for GoFundMes overnight, why can't each city have its own general fund that is privately funded by people who care about equality and mental health? Now, sure, there's going to be opportunities as we move along for public money to fund these things as well. Let's not count on it. We don't have time to wait. Ending stigma is great. What's next? I think it's important at the end of this podcast that you join the discussion and that you join the think tank that we're creating to help us find solutions and solves for the issue of access, the next great mountain we must scale and climb in this journey with mental health. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Mondo, DrMondo, and you could follow Cheat Code Foundation at Cheat Code, CheatCode, and reach out to us and let us know some ideas that you have. Ending stigma is so important, but if we only stop here, it's not enough. What is the next step we'll take to solve the issue of access? Thanks for joining me. It's time to level up with Dr. Mondo.
Vover!